Hi, this is Life Master Kevin Noren again. Life Chess Master, I'm not a master of life. As Emmanuel Lasker once said, in life we are all duffers. In the end, we all get checkmated. And speaking of Emmanuel Lasker, who was world champion for 27 years, we're going to take a look at one of his games. And it's a game I couldn't find any videos of because I want to do something other people haven't done yet. And there's no fireworks in this game. I'm trying to give an example of positional chess here, and you're still going to find it pretty interesting. So this game was played in 1909 in the St. Petersburg, Russia tournament. St. Petersburg, which later became Leningrad and then went back to St. Petersburg. And this tournament in St. Petersburg 1909 was like one of the strongest international tournaments of that era. And Lasker was playing against someone named Cohn, C-O-H-N. Not the infamous lawyer Roy Cohn, but someone named Eric Cohn, who was a good master player back in those days. But anyway, let's get on with the game. Okay, we start with e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5, the Roy Lopez, very common opening. And the most common defense for black is a6, the Morphy defense, which after if the bishop retreats, you have the option of b5 later on. But also a very good move is knight f6, counterattacking the e4 pawn. And now in our game, white castled, ignoring that. Now, knight takes e4 right now. That leads to the Berlin defense, which is a very good defense. You know, I should note that white could get the pawn back immediately by playing this rook over to e1, and then if the knight moves, he'll be able to get the e5 pawn. But that takes us too far off course. So, black in our game, Cohn played bishop e7, a normal developing move. And now Lasker plays knight c3, normal developing move, defending the e4 square. And now eventually white, you know, he might be threatening right now to take this and then take on c6 and win the e5 pawn. So black plays d6. Now that transposes into what's called the Steinitz defense, so the Roy Lopez, a really old-fashioned defense. And black has quite a cramped but pretty solid game. White plays the most aggressive move, d5, which will, because of the pinned knight, renew the threat on e5. It also threatens d5. There's a pin on the knight. So, black simply plays bishop d7, unpinning the knight. And if white tries to win a pawn by taking the knight here and bishop takes, after taking the pawn on e5, black will have the knight and the bishop on this pawn. That just leads to even material. So, white has a choice here, and you could play b3. Not a bad move. Even rook to e1 is not bad. It's been played a lot, but then Lasker makes this simple developing move. Pretty good move. And black takes on d4, relieving the tension. The knight takes, and then black castles. And now this move may seem a little strange, but the idea is just to keep up the initiative by, and paradoxically, he's exchanging a piece to avoid more exchanges. Then after the pawn takes, well, he's got his knight on a good square, which he wanted to keep. You know, if this bishop weren't watching, this knight could come into f5 and things could be troublesome. If black tries to get rid of this knight with c5, the knight can go here. And white is always threatening this move e5, just really wrecking the black pawn formation. So, now white plays queen to d3. Now, this is just a good developing move. And what else can you do here? On this square, the queen can, it can go to g3 or f3. It can help in a kingside attack. Not immediately, but it's just a good spot for the queen. We have to wait and see what's going to happen before we decide on a really definite plan. And now black has something of a cramped game and decides to get some pieces off the board and plays knight to g4. The bishop's threatened. White simply takes. Black recaptures. And f4 might be a good move here, but Lasker brings this other rook out. He doesn't want to make a committal pawn move yet. He wants everything in order before making a really aggressive assault with f4. And now black plays this move, queen to h4. Well, threatens mate. Now, he doesn't seriously expect the world champion to fall for mate in one. But what's one of the ideas here? Let's just look at a hypothetical variation, which is not best play by any means, but let's just try to get an idea of what happens, for instance, if this obvious move h3 gets played. Now, again, these are hypothetical moves, not absolute best play. Let's say knight to e5, hitting the queen. Let's say the queen goes back to d2. And now, gee, if only this weren't here and that weren't there, well, I could fork the king and queen. So we start off with c5, hitting the knight, and if the knight moves, you've got bishop takes h3, crushing the black king side, and if he takes, of course, we've got knight to f3 check.
Winning the queen.
Exactly. And so going back to this position, now maybe h3 could be played. Maybe we didn't make the best moves, but at any rate, Lasker makes this simple move, protecting h2 with knight f3 and hitting the queen at the same time. The queen goes back to h5. Not a bad square and a nice aggressive play. Now Lasker plays h3. Otherwise, his knight is stuck there. The knight comes here, and black has succeeded in getting a couple more pieces off the board. Now, finally, Lasker gets his pawns in operation and plays f4. Black tries to not waste time and gives a check on c5, and the king goes to h2. This queen is there. Okay, now, in this position, black plays bishop to e6. And it's kind of a useless move because the bishop isn't really badly placed here. I mean, maybe it could have gone to c8 but here, this is a really tempting kind of move because it feels like you're bringing the bishop to a better square, closer to the center. It also threatens bishop c4 winning the exchange at the same time. So saying, well, I'm not losing any time. But white replies with a simple b3. Now, the b3 would have been a useful move for white in any case because sooner or later black was going to put a rook on this open b file and force b3 anyway. So now white's threatening with an extra tempo to shove this pawn all the way down to f6. So that would really break up the black king side. So we have to stop and ask ourselves, how do we meet that threat? How are we going to meet this threat of f4 followed by f6, destroying the black king side pawn formation? Take some time out and figure this out. Okay, we've switched to a 2D board to give you a better look at this position because this is where we're going to go into a little bit of depth here. Now, white is threatening to play that pawn, hitting the bishop, and then go all the way down to f6, which would just wreck black's pawn formation on the king side. And so the question is, if you were black, what would you do about that?
f6.
F6 is, in my opinion, the best move because, f5 would just be a dumb move now for white because the f6 pawn would just completely block it. There's no point in playing f5. You can't shove it down to f6. In this position here, it could put the bishop on f7, say, and white is just giving himself a horrible e5 square. It's a hole. I mean, black can plunk a queen or a rook in there, and he can, base his entire game on going after that weak pawn on e4. So that would just be bad. So f6 is a good move. But in the game, black didn't want to patiently defend, and he tried to play what appears at first sight to be kind of an active move and plays f5. But this really doesn't work out. Now, I have to say that this happens a lot in positions where there's a certain degree of tension. a player wants to clarify the situation, and that's what he's trying to do here. Well, it doesn't work out so well. It gets clarified as a disadvantage. So Lasker just moves the pawn up to e5, and if black takes that, it's not going to be good. Let's take a quick look. Okay, takes now. The rook takes, not the pawn, not to get a pay, because this e file is great. That e5 squares is great for that rook. The queen and the bishop are attacked. If the queen goes to d6, we just take it off and then win the bishop on e6. So the queen has to go to e7. So let's go back. So in this position, black would have to play queen to e7. So then we've got rook on f to e1. Again attacking the pinned bishop. What has he got? Rook to f6. And we can even pile up on that some more with queen to e3. Look at that. I mean, look, even if white's not going to win material here, it's just a great looking position. If let's say rook to e8, we can even win that a7 pawn. We'll have a nice passed a2 pawn. It's just horrible. Now let's say go back, instead of rook to e8, let's say king to f7 now let's say king to f7. It's just a wretched position here. We could play knight to a4, and what is he going to do about knight to c5? I mean, we won't look at this all the way through, but I mean, if white doesn't actually win material here, he's got a tremendous position. Clearly, taking the pawn wouldn't be good. So let's go back and see what happened. So after this move, e5, I think that black should probably play... now, I should note, again, the threat is to take on d6 and win that bishop on e6. Black could play, like, say, maybe rook at f to e8 to protect that bishop. And white could play knight to a4. I think that white's got a better position, but black is in the game here. But let's go back and see what actually got played. Again, we have a situation where after this is what got played, d5, black wants to get the pawns fixed. He wants to stabilize the situation. And again, this is a situation where a lot of players, they don't have the patience to maintain the status quo, and they want to do something to bring clarity into the game. And black figures, well, I've got a solid position. He attacks me, I defend. So I'm in there. But now we're going to see something interesting happen, where white is going to get an incredible positional advantage. And we start out by knight to a4. It's not just to hit the queen, and we're going to see why. First of all, the queen goes back to e7, nothing better. And now, here's another critical situation. We want to blockade those squares, c5 and d4. And the obvious way to do it is queen to d4. Now we've got a severe blockade on there. It doesn't seem like much, I mean, white's not threatening anything, but this kind of positional advantage, it's a kind of positional advantage where a player loses and they have no idea, they didn't blunder anything, and they wonder why they lost. But black tries to get the file. Black, he's going to try to keep white from putting that knight on c5 and keeping it there, but the knight goes there, and we'll see that white has the resources to keep that knight there. So a5. Now let's see. Going back, what if rook to b5? Trying to get rid of the knight, b5. White simply plays b4 and cements the knight there. b3 to b4, and look at that knight. The knight is practically laughing at the bishop. I can attack you, but you can't attack me. And white has different ways to try to improve his game. He might operate on the queen side or the king side, but if you take a good look at this formation in the center, white commands all this space and black is just helpless. So black is going to try to open this game up. He's threatening to play. He'd like to play rook to b4 and kick that queen away and try to kick the knight away. But we'll see that white has just enough timing to maintain this knight. We start out with this. Now, if the rook had come to b5, pretty much like we discussed, the pawn goes to b4, and black has really not accomplished anything. So, black played his king to f7. Now, why that? Because, well, it protects the bishop. He wants to leave that bishop there, blocking the e5 pawn, which is passed, and that will free his queen. But, black is starting to run out of good moves here already. Even if black moved his queen, where would the queen go? To h4? Looks pretty active. Well, then, if he went to h4 in the next move, then white just has g3, and the queen hasn't accomplished anything. So we see that black is getting increasingly helpless here. Oh, this is a really good move here. White still needs to win this game. That knight on c5 and the queen on d4 aren't going to win by themselves. So white is free to operate on the queen side as well, and he's going to get an open a file. Now the rook comes to b5, hitting the knight. He doesn't have much better, really. Now, we know the right move here. What are you going to do here if you're white?
Well, maybe a lot of players might somehow rather think that getting rid of the bishop now would be a good thing to do, but as you will see in this game, that's just going to help black equalize. I believe.
I mean, that knight is a great piece. I mean, it's just like putting clogging. It's like you'd have to call the plumber to get rid of that knight if it were in your pipes. Why get rid of that beautiful knight and that bishop? It's on the same color square as its pawns. So we need to we don't want to give up that nice knight. We cement that knight down there and play b4. The only way black is going to get rid of that knight is to give up the exchange, and then you're just lost. I mean the exchange, you can still fight on the exchange down, but we'll see what happens. So he gangs up on the b4 pawn. He still hopes if he just had one more move, he could get rid of this horrible blockade, but then white just consolidates more with c3. He's just got this iron little formation there. And
I have a question. What if we go back a move, and before the black rook, what if bishop back to c8 now?
Well, that's a good question. Well, let's take a look.
So if that were the case...
Oh, you know what? Even e6 check could be played here. That would cramp black even more. Black can't take that pawn because of rook at f, or a rook, goes to e1 and the bishop's pinned, and we're just going to knock off that bishop. So the king would have to go back to, say, f8.
So king back to f8.
This is just a horrible position. We could just play the rook to f to e1 again. Oh, all moving the bishop back really does is allow white to push his way into the black position even more. The rook can go to f5, forcing g6. Oh,
what about
there's enormous possibilities.
Black plays.
That might be the best thing black can do. So let's see what happens. We take back with the pawn. Now the a8 rook is defended. Let's say it just swaps off and white swaps back. Now that e6 pawn is still poisoned because of rook to e1.
Because if that,
rook to e1, yeah, and we're just going to knock that thing. Even if the king goes to f7, we're going to end up ahead in material by taking that bishop. So going back, white's threatening to come down with rook to a8. I mean, this really looks devastating. How can you even hold this position? Let's say rook to b8. Oh, wait, in this position, wait, Let's go back here. Okay, this is the position we want. Now, rook takes rook, rook takes rook, and now we just saw that the bishop can't take the pawn. So white is threatening to play rook to a8 now, pinning the bishop. What are you going to do about that? Rook to b8. You could try moving the queen, but then it's still going to be a pin. You got an idea for a move? Try something. I think black is busted here. Let's try rook to b8 to stop that. Okay. If queen to f6, we just take it and then play rook to a8, winning the bishop. So what about rook to b8? That's the most. That looks like the most solid defensive try. So play the rook to e1, play it to e5. You can play rook to g1 and g4. White can just sit there and improve his position a bit at a time until the black position breaks.
I think that keeping the rook on the back rank does make more sense for example of having a strategy rather than just a quick tactic. Although that
right, there's no immediate way to crush black, but we can just keep making our position so good.
That, and then if knight takes, and then queen takes, rook gets the pawn, but at least
threatening mate too on top of it on g7.
Yes, it does. And now if the queen comes over here trying to get an attack, there's just no time. So it does turn out that the rook coming to a7 works out.
You see how when white has this big positional advantage, you keep making one try after another for black, and the positional advantage for white is so strong that no matter what you come up with for black, his position eventually collapses. So let's go back to the actual game. So we got b4, and this is rook to a to b8, and the simple c3. Nothing spectacular. He just likes that knight on c5. It's a tower of strength, and we just support this little bulwark here, and black cannot do anything. White has his choice of plans. He can play. Right now he's threatening to play a4, kicking the rook back. And then it goes to b6, only an undefended square. And then white can play pawn takes a5. He's got a double pass pawn, but that pawn is going to be really strong. So there's an immediate threat there. And black couldn't take the pressure anymore. And he knows that he's come to the realization that white's position is so good that he's lost. And he makes this desperate move. Now he was maybe hoping to play. If he played rook to b2, it just doesn't do anything. Let's go back. Let's say he tried to get active. I think probably his idea was to get his rook active, but it's a lone rook out there doing nothing. He's got no other piece supporting. In fact, white could just play rook at f to b1 here, and the rook could try to stay on that seventh rank, and then the other rook comes down to b8. Actually, if white could probably trap that rook if it sticks around there too much. If white even got the rooks off the board, he's winning. He's the exchange up, and black has no counterplay. So let's go back here. After rook to b5.
Pawn takes.
Actually,
I think black resigned in this position here.
He did. He played one more move to attack the pawn, and then after this simple move, he resigned, because now if he plays rook takes c5, that rook is kind of stuck there now. Rook to b7. You could double rooks for one thing. If now rook to c4, then we've got queen to a7. Oh, and then he's really like threatening to clean up. With rook takes c7, pinning the queen. The bishop won't help. He'll just take that too. Everything caves in. Going back a little bit, after this move, if he played, let's say he plays queen takes c5 here. He resigned here, but let's see what happens if queen takes c5. Then we could just play rook takes b5. Now, let's say queen takes d4.
It's black to move here.
Yeah, and he plays queen takes d4, takes, back, pawn takes,
okay,
rook,
yeah.
and then we've got rook to c1. And he can try, let's say black gets desperate, he tries to play b4 and get a passed pawn. This is easily dealt with. We'll take this first. We can take first there, check. King moves. We take on b4. Black takes back, and we've got rook to b7. And we'll scoop up that pawn. Then will be a pawn and the exchange up. And it'll be particularly easy to win this game because that black bishop is still a pretty bad piece. You know, white can play his king to g3 and f3 and g4. He can put his rook back to the 6th or 7th rank and keep the black king. It'll be really easy to win this game. And Cohn knows that the world champion is going to win this game. He could win this game with his eyes closed.
So, what in the end, what would you say is the important lesson out of this slow-moving positional play by Lasker?
Well, the critical point was where black he got to it.
All right. Well, thank you for the lesson, and hopefully somebody learned something out of this and can make use of it in one of their chess games, whether for fun or in a tournament.